Imagine being arrested in your own home. No warning, no explanation. A SWAT team kicks down your door, guns drawn, shoving you to the ground as they slap handcuffs on your wrists, all while your neighbors watch in stunned silence. They call you a criminal, a dangerous drug dealer. Everything you've built, your reputation, your dreams shattered in a matter of minutes. That's exactly what happened to Naomi Carter, a fierce black woman who dedicated her life to fighting for justice. But what she didn't know was that the very system she believed in would be the one to betray her. They didn't just want to lock her away. They wanted to erase her, to destroy her, to turn her into a cautionary tale for anyone who dared to challenge power. But what they didn't realize was that Naomi Carter wasn't someone who went down without a fight. They thought she was just another pawn in their game. They were wrong because the woman they tried to silence, she's about to become their judge. Welcome to a gripping tale of betrayal, corruption, and justice. This is the story of how a woman framed for a crime she didn't commit turned the tables, forcing those who sought to destroy her to kneel before justice. And trust me, you won't see the ending coming. Stonebridge was once a symbol of progress and prosperity. Years ago, it was a vital industrial hub where thousands of workers flocked to earn a living in factories, mechanical workshops, and construction sites. The streets buzzed with the sound of car horns, and neon lights from towering buildings reflected off the river, creating a scene full of life. But that golden era is now nothing more than a memory. When major corporations left in search of cheaper labor elsewhere, the city's economy spiraled into decline. Factories shut down, once thriving neighborhoods became abandoned, and the crumbling streets turned into a breeding ground for crime. A handful of the wealthy continued their lavish lifestyles behind the fortified gates of their exclusive enclaves, but the rest of the city was left to rot in poverty, unemployment, and despair. Beneath this decaying surface, a hidden power structure had taken root, manipulating everything in its grasp. The police, the courts, even the media, everything was controlled by those with money and influence. Corrupt officers no longer served to protect the people. Instead, they became tools for enforcing order in a way that benefited the powerful. The wealthy could buy their way out of any legal trouble, while the poor and communities of color were constantly targeted by ruthless crackdowns. Arbitrary arrests, excessive sentences for minor infractions, and the mysterious disappearances of those who dared to resist the system became part of everyday life. People had long stopped believing in justice because, in Stonebridge, justice was never meant for everyone. The neighborhoods where people of color lived were under relentless surveillance. Officers like Richard Vaugh and Evan Mitchell didn't need a reason to stop, search, or even arrest someone. A wrong glance, a word of protest, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time could turn anyone into a criminal in their eyes. Families lost loved ones without ever receiving a proper explanation. Young men were framed for crimes they didn't commit and thrown into prison, where they became cheap labor for corporations with government contracts. It was all part of a system designed to keep power in the hands of a few while trapping the vulnerable in a cycle of fear and injustice. The media played its role in enabling this corruption. The city's major newspapers and top news channels carefully crafted narratives that favored law enforcement and the authorities. When an arrest happened, they never questioned its legitimacy. Instead, they focused on painting the victim as a former convict, a gang affiliate, or simply someone acting suspiciously. Stories of abuse, wrongful convictions, and innocent people being locked away never made the headlines. Those stories didn't generate profit, and more importantly, they threatened the grip of those in control. As a result, the people of Stonebridge lived in fear, trapped in the knowledge that no matter how loudly they screamed, no one would hear them. But even in the thickest darkness, there were still those who refused to submit. Activists continued to fight, lawyers took on impossible cases, and brave individuals chose not to live in fear. They were few, but they existed, and Naomi Carter was one of them. From a young age, she had witnessed injustice suffocating the lives of those around her. She saw friends treated like criminals before they ever had the chance to make a mistake. She grew up with a burning question in her mind. Did justice truly exist in Stonebridge, or was it just an illusion designed to conceal an ugly truth? She was determined to find the answer, and more than that, she was determined to change the city. But what she didn't realize was that her resolve would place her at the center of a conspiracy far greater than she could have imagined. Naomi Carter grew up in a world where justice did not always belong to the righteous. When she was just 8 years old, a tragic car accident took the lives of her parents, leaving her in the care of her grandmother, Evelyn Carter. Evelyn was a tough woman, someone who had seen enough injustice in her lifetime to understand that the only real protection came from standing up for yourself. She taught Naomi that justice was not something given. It was something you had to take for yourself. From a young age, Naomi witnessed her friends being treated unfairly by the police and saw families around her pushed into poverty by a broken system. But instead of accepting it as the way things were, she questioned everything. She never stayed silent when she saw someone being wronged, a trait that made Evelyn both proud and deeply concerned. As she grew older, Naomi realized that if she truly wanted to change anything, she needed to understand the law, the very weapon the powerful used to oppress the people. She became one of the top students in her law program, earning a full scholarship to one of the nation's most prestigious universities. Throughout her years of study, she examined the cracks in the justice system, learning how they were exploited to benefit the elite. After graduating, she returned to Stonebridge, turning down lucrative job offers in major cities to serve the community she loved. Naomi wasn't just a lawyer. She was a symbol of hope for the oppressed, a voice for those who had none. But that also made her a threat to those who thrived on the city's corruption. No one despised Naomi more than Detective Richard Vaugh and Sergeant Evan Mitchell, two corrupt cops who had built their careers on fear and injustice. Vaugh was a seasoned officer, a cunning and ruthless manipulator who knew how to bend the system to make his crimes look legal. Mitchell, younger and more brutal, never bothered to hide his racism and used violence to get what he wanted. Together, they orchestrated countless wrongful arrests, throwing innocent people behind bars to tighten their grip on power and line their pockets. But Naomi was the only one bold enough to publicly challenge them. She had helped many of their victims appeal their convictions, overturning unjust sentences they had orchestrated, making her a dangerous enemy in their eyes. At the top of this corrupt hierarchy was Judge Leonard Hayes, a man whose dignified facade masked his willingness to sell justice to the highest bidder. Once a promising judge, years of wealth and influence had turned him into a puppet for those pulling the strings. Whenever Vaugh and Mitchell needed a conviction to go their way, Hayes was there to ensure the outcome. Naomi knew this and had even tried to push for an investigation into his rulings, but the system was too deeply entrenched to crumble so easily. Naomi wasn't the first to challenge Vaugh, Mitchell, or Hayes, but she was the only one smart enough, fearless enough, and relentless enough to become a real threat. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was a warrior for justice, and that terrified them. Vaugh, Mitchell, and Hayes understood that if she kept going, it was only a matter of time before she uncovered enough evidence to bring down everything they had spent years building. That was something they couldn't allow. They didn't just want to silence her, they wanted to destroy her completely. And to do that, they would create a crime so damning that not even Naomi Carter could escape it. Naomi Carter had never been the kind of person who knew fear. She understood that she was walking a tightrope between justice and danger, but that had never stopped her. She had seen too many victims of Vaugh and Mitchell, innocent people thrown into prison simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, framed because they dared to resist. She had helped some of them overturn their convictions, but she knew that was only the tip of a massive iceberg. If she truly wanted to change anything, she had to go after the root of the problem. And then she found exactly what she had been searching for, a pattern of arrests, all suspiciously similar. The suspects were always people of color, charged with drug possession or gang affiliation, and in nearly every case, the primary evidence against them was a bag of narcotics that had been discovered in their car or home. Naomi started digging deeper, gathering testimonies from families, analyzing case files, and speaking with other lawyers. The more she uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Every single case bore the fingerprints of Vaugh and Mitchell. Naomi refused to stay silent. She reached out to independent journalists, sought support from civil rights organizations, and even held a press conference to expose these wrongful arrests. She didn't mention Vaugh and Mitchell by name, but everyone understood the message she was sending. She knew this was a direct challenge, but she didn't care. She believed in the law, in the truth, and in the idea that with enough evidence, she could force the system to hold itself accountable. But Vaugh and Mitchell weren't the type to be shaken. They had thrived in this corrupt system for years. They weren't just dirty cops. They were predators who knew how to manipulate, how to make things disappear, and most importantly, how to eliminate threats before they became real dangers. When Va heard about Naomi's investigation, he simply leaned back in his office chair, took a sip of his coffee, and smirked. He had seen people like her before. They made noise, they stirred things up, and then they disappeared when they realized there was no way out. But Naomi was different. She wasn't just making noise. She was digging into something no one was supposed to touch. Mitchell wasn't nearly as patient. He exploded with rage the moment he heard about Naomi's press conference. Who the hell does she think she is? He barked as he stormed into Va's office. We need to shut her up. Va remained calm, but there was a dangerous glint in his eyes. Not yet, he murmured. We're going to make her destroy herself. And so the plan was set, not just to silence Naomi, but to obliterate her. If she wanted to investigate wrongful arrests, they would make her the prime example, a name that people would whisper when they thought of crime. They would fabricate a case so airtight, so damning, that not even Naomi could escape it. They wouldn't just silence her. They would turn her into everything she had fought against. Naomi Carter had no idea that she was walking straight into a trap, one that had been designed with meticulous precision to ensure her downfall. Va and Mitchell weren't just trying to get her out of the way. They wanted to obliterate her, to take everything she stood for and twist it into something unrecognizable. They wanted to turn her into the very thing she had spent her life fighting against. This wasn't about silencing her. This was about making her a cautionary tale, a warning to anyone who dared to challenge them. They moved carefully, methodically, taking their time to ensure that when the hammer fell, Naomi wouldn't have a single escape route. It started with a meeting in a secluded, dimly lit bar on the outskirts of Stonebridge. Va, Mitchell, and Judge Hayes sat in the back room, away from prying eyes, as the air thickened with cigarette smoke and quiet conspiracies. Hayes, always composed, listened as Va laid out the plan. He had done a lot of dirty work in his career, but even he felt a flicker of unease at the sheer scale of what was being proposed. Va leaned forward, his fingers tapping against the scarred wooden table. This isn't just about putting her away, he murmured, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. This is about making sure no one even thinks about picking up where she left off. We're going to turn her into the face of crime in this city. Mitchell grinned, the kind of grin that sent chills down a man's spine. I've got just the guy for this, he said, exhaling a cloud of smoke. Darnell Jones. Mid-level dealer, deep in debt, scared shitless. He'll do anything to save his own ass. We set him up, and he brings Naomi down with him. Vaughn nodded approvingly, but Judge Hayes still looked skeptical. You're talking about framing one of the most well-known attorneys in this city, he pointed out, his voice low. She has connections. The media is watching her. This won't be as easy as planting evidence on some street thug. Va's smile didn't waver. That's the beauty of it, he said smoothly. We don't need to silence the media. We use them. We feed them exactly what they want. A scandal, a perfect fall from grace. By the time we're done, no one will see Naomi Carter as a crusader for justice. They'll see her as a fraud, a criminal, a hypocrite. And so the plan took shape. The first step was digital. Va and his team fabricated a series of text messages, carefully crafting a narrative in which Naomi appeared to be orchestrating drug deals behind the scenes. Using burner phones and encryption tools, they constructed entire conversations between her and fictitious gang leaders, detailing shipments, transactions, and coded instructions. Every message was designed to feel authentic, to hold up under scrutiny. Then came the financials. Mitchell had an entire set of bank records forged, creating the illusion of large, unexplained transactions funneling through accounts tied to Naomi. Receipts, offshore holdings, dummy corporations, it was all there, laid out in excruciating detail. They ensured the paper trail was so elaborate, so deeply rooted, that even the most skilled forensic accountant would struggle to disprove it. But that wasn't enough. They needed something tangible. That's where Darnell Jones came in. Va and Mitchell summoned him to a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town, a place reeking of rust and decay. He arrived looking like a man on death row, his hands shaking as he stepped inside. Mitchell wasted no time, throwing a thick folder onto the table in front of him. Congratulations, Darnell, Mitchell said, his tone mocking. You're about to be a very important man. Darnell swallowed hard, glancing down at the papers. What is this? Your new reality, Va said smoothly, lighting a cigarette. See, we've got a little problem, Naomi Carter. And you, my friend, are going to help us solve it. Darnell flipped through the documents. Phony transaction records, surveillance photos doctored to make it look like he had been in secret meetings with Naomi, even signed statements that he had never seen before. His breath came short and fast. "I can't do this," he stammered. "She's not." Mitchell's hand shot out, gripping Darnell's jaw in a vice-like grip. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You will do this," he hissed. "Because if you don't, I'll personally make sure the next time your mother sees you, it'll be in a body bag." Darnell's resistance crumbled. He nodded weakly, sealing Naomi's fate with his silence. But Va and Mitchell weren't finished. They needed a witness, someone who could take the stand and tell the world that Naomi Carter was a drug lord in disguise. That's when they found Marcus Reed, a two-bit criminal with a history of theft and drug possession, desperate for a way out. Va slid a thick envelope across the table. "All you have to do is testify that Naomi Carter was behind the whole operation," Va said, his voice silk smooth. "Do that, and you'll have enough money to disappear forever." Marcus hesitated for only a moment before grabbing the envelope. Va smirked. Another piece in place. The final step was execution. In the dead of night, Mitchell led a team of officers into Naomi's office. They worked quickly, planting bricks of cocaine in her filing cabinets, slipping forged documents into her case files. Every detail was meticulously placed, ensuring that when investigators arrived, the evidence would be overwhelming. Before leaving, Mitchell took one last look around the room, his lips curling into a smirk. "Sweet dreams, Carter," he murmured. Naomi Carter had never imagined that her life could change in an instant. As the dim glow of the streetlights filtered through her office window, she remained hunched over her desk, flipping through pages of case files tied to the questionable arrests orchestrated by Va and Mitchell. She was close, so close to uncovering the full scope of their corruption. But she had no idea that at that very moment, just beyond the walls of her apartment, a heavily armed SWAT team stood in formation, their rifles locked and loaded. Cold eyes glared from behind riot masks, waiting for the command to strike. The clock on the wall struck 10 p.m. The silence was shattered by a violent pounding at the door. "Police, open up now!" A deep voice bellowed, followed by the heavy stomp of boots echoing down the hallway. Naomi's head snapped up, her pulse spiking. A chill ran down her spine as recognition dawned on her, the sound of a raid. But why? What were they doing here? She knew she had done nothing wrong. Before she could move, the door exploded inward with a deafening crash. A swarm of dark figures flooded her apartment, beams of blinding light slicing through the room like knives. Down on the ground, before she could react, a massive figure lunged at her, slamming her onto the floor. A sharp pain shot up her ribs as a heavy knee dug into her back, pinning her in place. A rough hand yanked her arms behind her, and the cold bite of steel clamped down on her wrists. "You are under arrest for operating an illegal drug trafficking ring," a voice announced, flat and emotionless. Naomi's breath hitched, the words barely registering over the pounding in her ears. This was a mistake, a nightmare, a sick joke. "What?" she gasped, struggling against the crushing weight holding her down. "You're wrong. I don't." A sharp tug silenced her protests as she was hauled to her feet, her shoulders screaming in protest. Her vision swam as the room tilted. A sea of faceless officers surrounded her, their expressions hidden behind dark visors. "Stop. This is a mistake. I haven't done anything." Naomi's voice cracked, raw with fury and disbelief, but no one was listening. They dragged her through the doorway, her feet barely skimming the ground. The hallway was filled with neighbors, their faces frozen in a mixture of shock, horror, and quiet judgment. "Jesus Christ. Isn't that Naomi Carter?" someone whispered. "I knew it," a man muttered, shaking his head. "She always acted too righteous." Their words hit her harder than the rough hands gripping her arms. These were the people she had fought for, the people she had defended, and now they were looking at her as if she were a monster. Then came the flashing lights, the sea of reporters, the cameras zooming in, capturing every humiliating second. "This is breaking news," a reporter shouted into a microphone, barely containing her excitement. "We are witnessing the arrest of Naomi Carter, the well-known attorney who has been an outspoken critic of the police force. Shockingly, sources allege that she has secretly been the mastermind behind a massive drug operation. This revelation has sent shockwaves through the city." Naomi was shoved into the back of a squad car, the door slamming shut behind her. The world outside was a blur of flashing lights and shouting voices. Inside the car, The silence was suffocating. Her pulse was erratic. Her lungs burned. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. She forced herself to breathe, to steady her racing heart. She couldn't let them see her break. Naomi Carter had never been the type to back down, but this time, she wasn't sure if there was a way out. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was drowning, pulled into a darkness so deep that no one could save her. The darkness of the jail cell swallowed Naomi whole. The cold concrete walls surrounded her, the flickering fluorescent light above only making the space feel more suffocating. The air was thick with the stench of damp stone, rusted metal, and the harsh sting of disinfectant. She sat on the stiff, narrow cot, her back pressed against the freezing wall, her mind a blank slate. She had been in rooms like this before, but never under these circumstances. She had always been the lawyer, the one standing on the other side of the bars, fighting for her clients, exposing corruption, demanding justice. But now she was the one locked away, the one stripped of power, the one the world had labeled a criminal. She buried her face in her hands, forcing herself to think rationally. Everything had happened too fast. Just an hour ago, she had been reviewing case files in her apartment, and now she was being accused of running a drug empire. She had always known Vaugh and Mitchell were corrupt, but she had underestimated them. She had never imagined they could orchestrate something this flawless. There was no loophole, no obvious weak spot in their setup. The images replayed in her mind, the drugs they had found in her office, the fabricated text messages, the false witnesses. The evidence was so convincing, so airtight, that even she, for a brief second, had felt the weight of guilt pressing down on her chest. How had they done it? How had they taken a woman who had spent her life upholding the law and turned her into a criminal overnight? The worst part was that she had no way to fight back. Every shred of evidence that could have cleared her name had been erased, buried, or twisted against her. And now she had no choice but to face the brutal reality. Getting out of this wouldn't be easy. She exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. But then the sharp sound of metal scraping against metal shattered the silence. The heavy lock clicked open, and a guard stepped in, tossing a newspaper onto the small metal table with a smirk. "You should read this," he said, his voice laced with mockery. "The whole city is talking about you." Naomi reached for the paper, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded it. The front page hit her like a punch to the gut. A grainy, unflattering image of her in handcuffs dominated the layout, her hair disheveled, her face caught in the harsh glare of a camera flash, her expression frozen in shock. Below it, the headline screamed across the page, "Naomi Carter exposed as drug kingpin, the two-faced lawyer." She flipped through the pages, scanning the bolded lines that cut through her like a blade. How long has she been deceiving us? Naomi Carter isn't a hero. She's been using her influence to hide her crimes. Were all her past legal victories just cover-ups for her own network? Her stomach twisted into knots. The media wasn't just reporting her arrest. They were dismantling her reputation piece by piece. On social media, the backlash was even worse. People who had once championed her work were now turning their backs, their words dripping with doubt and betrayal. "I always believed in her. But what if the evidence is real? You can't fake something this detailed. Nobody gets framed that perfectly." Desperate for any sign of support, she kept reading, but the more she searched, the more the words blurred into a mess of accusations and disappointment. And then she saw it. Familiar names, friends, colleagues, people she had trusted. They weren't defending her. They weren't even questioning the allegations. "This is devastating. I worked with Naomi for years. I never would have suspected this. If this is true, she's fooled all of us." Naomi clenched her jaw, biting down hard to keep the tears at bay. Now wasn't the time for weakness, but she couldn't ignore the harsh reality staring her in the face. The world had already condemned her before she had even stepped foot in a courtroom. Naomi sat on the freezing metal chair in the cramped interrogation room, her wrists still bound in handcuffs. The dim fluorescent light overhead flickered intermittently, casting jagged shadows across the cold gray walls. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of rusted iron bars. She had been locked up for 2 days now, 2 of the longest days of her life, and nothing had changed. No word from anyone willing to help, no hope of release. She needed a lawyer, but no one from her former circle dared to take her case. They were afraid that defending her would mean dragging themselves down with her. The heavy door creaked open. Naomi's shoulders tensed as a tall, lanky man stepped inside, a worn leather briefcase in hand. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his tousled brown hair hinted at long nights spent working, and his sharp eyes carried no judgment, only cautious scrutiny. He placed the briefcase on the table, pulled out the chair opposite her, and sat down. His movements were deliberate, measured. "Naomi Carter?" His voice was calm, almost casual, but there was something firm beneath the surface. Naomi studied him. She had met hundreds of lawyers in her career and could size up a person the moment they entered a room. He wasn't overly confident like the top-tier attorneys, nor did he carry the nervous energy of a rookie. He was somewhere in between, like someone who knew he was good but had never been given the recognition he deserved. "Who are you?" Her voice was hoarse from 2 days of near silence, speaking only to the indifferent guards. "Lucas Bennett." He pulled out a folder from his briefcase and flipped it open. "I'm your lawyer." Naomi arched an eyebrow. "I didn't hire you." Lucas smirked, unfazed. "No, but someone sent me." He tapped the file. "Someone who believes you're innocent." Naomi narrowed her eyes. "Who?" Lucas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid a copy of the police report across the table. "I think you should look at this first." Naomi hesitated before lowering her gaze to the documents. The official arrest report, the police statements, the so-called evidence collected from her office, all laid out in neat, damning detail. "Too neat, too perfect. I've reviewed the entire case file," Lucas continued, flipping through the pages with practiced ease. "And there's a serious problem here." Naomi looked up, a flicker of hope in her otherwise exhausted eyes. "What problem?" Lucas laced his fingers together and leaned forward. "None of the evidence shows signs of tampering. No altered timestamps, no inconsistencies, no sloppy errors. Even the fabricated text messages are so meticulously done that forensic analysts wouldn't be able to tell they're fake." He let that sink in before he added, "Do you know what that means?" Naomi's pulse quickened as she processed his words. "They've been planning this for a long time." Lucas nodded. "Exactly." He slid another document her way. "The strongest evidence against you is the testimony of a man named Marcus Reed. According to this, he came forward voluntarily to expose your so-called drug operation. But there's a major issue. He was arrested 2 years ago for theft and has a history of severe mental instability. His credibility is non-existent. Yet somehow, the police got his statement admitted as a cornerstone of their case without a single challenge from the prosecution." Naomi clenched her jaw, flipping through the pages with growing unease. Lucas was right. The setup was flawless, too airtight. Vaugh and Mitchell hadn't just wanted to frame her. They had wanted to make sure there wasn't a single crack in their story. Lucas rested his elbows on the table, his gaze steady. "I know you're innocent, but knowing isn't enough. We need hard evidence. The problem is," he tapped the folder, "we don't have any yet." Naomi's fists tightened in frustration, her nails pressing into her palms. She had never felt this powerless before. But as she studied Lucas, she saw something in him, determination. He may not have been her first choice for an attorney, but at least he believed in her. And right now, that was the only thing keeping her from slipping into despair. "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice low but resolute. Lucas gave a small, knowing smile. "We prove that someone orchestrated this. And I know exactly where to start." Rachel Torres sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen, but her mind was far from the case files in front of her. She had been a cop in Stonebridge for nearly 3 years, and while she had always known that the department had its share of corruption, she never imagined she would find herself at the center of a conspiracy this deep. Since Naomi Carter's arrest, the atmosphere at the precinct had shifted in an unsettling way. Senior officers like Vaugh and Mitchell walked around with smug satisfaction, as if they had just pulled off the greatest victory of their careers. Even those who had once remained neutral now spoke of Naomi as if she were nothing more than a dangerous criminal, their opinions shaped by the media storm surrounding her. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too convenient, too perfectly orchestrated. Naomi Carter, a highly respected attorney who had spent years navigating the justice system, would not have made such a careless mistake. She wouldn't have left behind evidence so damning, so neatly tied together. Quietly, Rachel pulled up Naomi's case file on the internal system. At first glance, everything looked airtight. Text messages allegedly exchanged between Naomi and known drug traffickers, suspicious bank transactions, even audio recordings of her discussing illicit deals. It all painted a compelling picture of her guilt. But when Rachel started digging deeper, the cracks began to show. The first red flag was the timestamps. One of the text messages, supposedly sent from Naomi to a dealer, had been logged at the exact time she had been speaking at a public conference, a conference attended by dozens of people. Rachel cross-checked Naomi's schedule, and sure enough, there was no way she could have sent that message. Yet the official case file treated it as undeniable evidence. Her pulse quickened as she moved on to the audio recordings. One particular clip stood out. Naomi's voice, clear as day, discussing an incoming shipment of drugs. But something felt off. Rachel ran the file through the department's audio analysis software, and there it was, a discrepancy in the waveform. The recording had been altered, spliced together. Someone had manipulated Naomi's voice, making it sound like she had said something she never actually did. Rachel's fingers trembled slightly as she minimized the screen. This was bigger than she had expected. If Vaugh and Mitchell had gone to these lengths to fabricate evidence, then Naomi Carter wasn't just framed, she was being systematically erased. And if Rachel so much as breathed a word of this to the wrong person, she could be next. She cast a quick glance around the office. No one seemed to be paying her any attention, but paranoia gnawed at her. Vaugh and Mitchell were not the kind of men who tolerated loose ends. She had heard the rumors, stories of officers who had tried to expose them and ended up reassigned, fired, or worse. Taking a slow breath, Rachel reached for a small USB drive and began transferring the key files onto it. She moved quickly, her heart hammering with every passing second. When the transfer was complete, she slipped the USB into the inside pocket of her jacket and shut down her computer. She couldn't go public, not yet, not without a plan. Exposing the truth now would only get her silenced before she could do anything meaningful. If she wanted to help Naomi, she needed to be smart, careful. She needed to find someone who could fight this battle the right way. Rachel stood, exhaling sharply as she grabbed her coat. She might not know exactly how this would play out, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let Naomi Carter take the fall for something she didn't do. And she knew exactly who she needed to find. Naomi Carter walked into the courtroom, her wrists shackled in cold metal cuffs. The orange jumpsuit clung to her like a brand of disgrace, a stark contrast to the professional attire she had once worn in these very halls. Her hair was neatly tied back, but exhaustion weighed heavy on her face after days in confinement. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters lined the walls, cameras flashing, capturing every second of what had become the trial of the decade. But Naomi knew the truth. No one was here for justice. They had already decided what they wanted to believe. At the defense table, Lucas Bennett sat poised, his fingers tapping lightly against a stack of files. He had spent days preparing for this, knowing full well that the odds were stacked against them. Across the room, Michael Harper, the prosecutor with deep ties to the Stonebridge Police Department, adjusted his papers with smug confidence. He had no doubt about the outcome, and presiding over it all was Judge Leonard Hayes. The man Naomi knew was part of the very system trying to bury her. As the judge entered, the room rose in stiff, forced respect. Naomi locked eyes with him, unflinching, as he rapped his gavel against the bench. The case of the state versus Naomi Carter is now in session, Hayes announced, his gravelly voice carrying an air of finality. Lucas stood immediately, straightening his tie before addressing the court. Your Honor, my client, Naomi Carter, is the victim of an elaborate conspiracy. I have strong reason to believe that the evidence presented in this case has been fabricated, and I formally request access to all original data to verify its authenticity. His voice was steady, but he already knew what was coming. Harper rose without hesitation, his tone dripping with mockery. Your Honor, this request is nothing more than a desperate attempt to stall the inevitable. The prosecution has provided overwhelming evidence, financial records, direct communications between the defendant and known criminals, and most importantly, a witness who will testify to her direct involvement in drug trafficking. This case is built on facts, not speculation. Naomi clenched her fists under the table. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to demand the truth be heard, but she forced herself to stay silent. She knew that any emotional reaction would only be used against her. Lucas, undeterred, stepped forward and placed a folder onto the bench. Your Honor, I urge the court to reconsider. One of the key pieces of evidence, an audio recording allegedly featuring my client discussing drug transactions, has been flagged for possible manipulation. A forensic audio specialist I consulted has identified signs of tampering. Hayes barely glanced at the file before shaking his head. Mr. Bennett, unless your expert is officially appointed by this court, I cannot allow such claims to interfere with these proceedings. Your request is denied. Lucas ground his teeth, frustration flashing across his face. This was exactly what he had feared. They weren't just going to fight him. They were going to ensure that no avenue of defense was even possible. Then I request additional time to secure a court-appointed expert for verification. Hayes slammed the gavel down. Denied. We are proceeding as scheduled. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Naomi took a slow breath, steadying herself. She had expected this, but experiencing it firsthand, seeing just how easily the system shut out any attempt at the truth, was a different kind of weight pressing down on her. Lucas leaned down, his voice low and urgent. They're not going to let us challenge anything. They've locked every door before we even knocked. Naomi exhaled, her jaw tight. That means we need to find another way in. Before she could say anything else, Harper stood, turning toward the jury with the confidence of a man who already knew the verdict. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we are prosecuting a woman who has deceived this city. Naomi Carter, once praised as a champion of justice, has been using her position to manipulate the system for her own gain. The evidence against her is irrefutable, and by the time this trial concludes, you will see that there is only one possible verdict: guilty. Naomi's hands clenched tighter, her knuckles white. This wasn't about truth. It was about a show, about feeding the public exactly what they had been conditioned to believe. From the back of the room, Vaugh and Mitchell watched with smug satisfaction. Their work was done, their plan unfolding exactly as intended. Naomi could feel their victory in the air, the weight of inevitability pressing down on her. Lucas squeezed her shoulder lightly, a quiet reassurance that she wasn't alone. But as Naomi met Vaugh's gaze across the room, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. If she didn't find a way to break the game they had built, they would win. And that was something she refused to let happen. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown restless. The air buzzed with anger, thick with the voices of those who had already decided Naomi Carter's fate. They no longer saw her as the fearless attorney who had once fought for justice. To them, she was nothing more than a fraud, a criminal hiding behind a mask of righteousness. Handwritten signs bobbed above the sea of bodies, their messages clear and damning. Justice for Stonebridge. Criminal must pay. Naomi Carter, the city's betrayer, lawyer or drug lord. The truth is out. The media had done its job well. For days, major news outlets had played and replayed the footage of her arrest, hammering in the so-called undeniable evidence against her. Legal analysts appeared on television screens, dissecting the case with an air of neutrality, yet every word they spoke led to the same conclusion: that Naomi Carter had deceived everyone. Sitting in her cell, Naomi watched the tiny television mounted on the wall, her jaw tightening as a news anchor posed the inevitable question. Naomi Carter was once a rising star in the legal world, but now she faces some of the most serious charges in recent history. The question is, have we all been fooled? She bit her lip hard, tasting the metallic tang of frustration. They had twisted everything so perfectly. They had made sure there was no room for doubt, but not everyone had fallen for it. A small yet growing group of activists and independent journalists had begun to question the case. The speed at which Naomi had been arrested, the airtight nature of the evidence, the sheer convenience of it didn't sit right with them. One of the first to voice skepticism was Elliot Grant, a well-known investigative journalist. In a blog post that quickly went viral, he asked a question that made people pause. Could Naomi Carter truly be at the center of a drug empire, or are we witnessing one of the most sophisticated setups in modern legal history? His words ignited a ripple of doubt. Online forums buzzed with speculation, dividing public opinion. Some dismissed it as conspiracy nonsense, but others weren't so sure. This case is too clean. No holes, no inconsistencies. When has the Stonebridge Police Department ever been this efficient? We're talking about a legal system that has historically targeted our communities, and now we're supposed to trust them blindly? Naomi remained trapped behind bars, but outside, the first cracks in the story were beginning to form. Rachel Torres gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She had spent days wrestling with the decision she was about to make, knowing full well what it could cost her. She had seen firsthand what Vaugh and Mitchell were capable of. She had combed through the fabricated evidence, the false reports, the doctored messages, And most of all, she knew that if she spoke up, her life could be in danger. Being a young cop in a corrupt department meant knowing when to keep your mouth shut, but Rachel had never been good at staying silent. She reached into her jacket pocket, her fingers brushing against the small USB drive she had copied from the department's internal system. Inside were the files that could change everything. Text messages forged using high-level software, audio recordings spliced together to create fake conversations, police reports with falsified timestamps contradicting Naomi's whereabouts. It was undeniable proof that the case against Naomi Carter was a carefully crafted lie. But Rachel knew she couldn't bring this to her superiors. If she did, it would disappear before she even left the room. She couldn't trust anyone in the department. She had only one option. Pulling out her phone, she scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she had been debating for days, Elliot Grant. She hesitated for only a second before pressing call. The line rang twice before a low, steady voice answered. "Who is this?" "I have evidence," Rachel said quickly, her voice just above a whisper. Evidence that Naomi Carter was framed. Silence. A long, tense pause stretched between them, and Rachel's pulse pounded against her ribs. Then Grant spoke, his tone unreadable. "I'm listening." Rachel glanced out the car window, an uneasy feeling creeping over her. Was she being watched, or was it just paranoia? She took a steadying breath before replying. "I can't talk over the phone. We need to meet in person." Another pause, then finally, "Ember Cafe, tonight, 8 o'clock. Rachel ended the call and let out a shaky breath. She knew there was no turning back now. The moment she handed over that USB drive, she would become a target. But if she did nothing, Naomi Carter would be buried alive by a lie. That night, in the dimly lit corner of Ember Cafe, Rachel slid the USB drive across the table to Grant. He picked it up, plugged it into his laptop, and within seconds, his face hardened. "Jesus," he muttered under his breath. "They really did this. How long have they been getting away with it?" Rachel folded her arms tightly. Too long. Grant knew immediately what this meant. This wasn't just about Naomi Carter. This was about an entire system built on corruption, a network that had gone unchecked for years. "I'm running this story," he said, his voice resolute. "But this won't be enough. If we want to take them down, we need more than just a story." Rachel nodded. She had known that from the start. This was just the beginning. If she wanted to bring the truth to light, she would have to go deeper, take bigger risks, and that meant putting her own life on the line. The trial continued, playing out like a carefully scripted performance. Lucas Bennett stepped forward, gripping the documents that Rachel Torres had risked everything to obtain. The evidence clearly outlined tampered files, manipulated data, and the fabricated testimony of Marcus Reed evidence that should have been enough to force the court to reconsider the entire case. But Judge Leonard Hayes remained cold and unmoved. With a sharp crack of his gavel, he dismissed the motion without hesitation. "Mr. Bennett," Hayes said, his voice firm and detached, "I will not allow this trial to devolve into baseless conspiracy theories. The prosecution has provided substantial, verifiable evidence against the defendant. Your objections do not change that reality." Naomi clenched her fists under the table, her nails digging into her palms. Everything was unfolding exactly as Vaugh and Mitchell had planned. They had tightened their grip on the system so effectively that even with proof of their deception, no one dared to challenge them. Lucas took a deep breath, restraining the anger boiling inside him. He knew he couldn't afford to show frustration. Any display of emotion would be used against them. But he also knew that unless they found a way to break this game wide open, Naomi would be sentenced before she even had a chance to fight back. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady but firm, "I strongly urge this court to reconsider the evidence at hand. If we do not conduct a thorough investigation, we risk making a grievous mistake." Judge Hayes struck his gavel down hard. "Motion denied. The trial will proceed as scheduled." Naomi closed her eyes, feeling the walls closing in around her. Justice had never felt further away. Later that evening, as Lucas returned to his office, he noticed a plain manila envelope resting at his doorstep. There was no return address, no markings, just an unassuming package left in the shadows. A chill ran down his spine as he picked it up, scanning the empty street around him. Nothing. The streetlights flickered dimly, casting eerie shadows over the pavement. Locking the door behind him, Lucas carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. His breath caught in his throat the moment he saw it. Detective Vaugh, Sergeant Mitchell, and Judge Hayes sat together in a dimly lit corner of a bar, engaged in what appeared to be a highly secretive conversation. Lucas's mind raced. This wasn't just a casual meetup. This was proof of collusion. If the judge overseeing Naomi's case had been privately meeting with the very officers responsible for her arrest, it was undeniable evidence of corruption. But the real question was, who had taken this photo? And why risk exposing themselves? His fingers tightened around the picture. This was the breakthrough they needed, but it also meant they were getting dangerously close to something bigger than just Naomi's case. He immediately grabbed his phone and dialed Naomi's number, but the call didn't go through. Prison restrictions wouldn't allow her to take calls at night. His unease grew. They were running out of time. Rachel Torres sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had been avoiding going home for the past 2 days, switching locations every night because the feeling of being watched had become impossible to ignore. She had known the risks the moment she stole those files, but now the consequences were becoming real. Vaughn and Mitchell knew. As she stepped into her apartment, she immediately sensed something was off. The air felt heavy, charged with the presence of an intruder. Everything looked untouched, no broken locks, no ransacked drawers, but Rachel knew better. Slowly, she reached for her handgun, gripping it tightly as she moved toward the bedroom. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she placed her hand on the doorknob, inhaled sharply, then swung it open. Empty, but something was waiting for her on the bed. Perfectly placed in the center of the mattress was a large envelope. Her stomach twisted as she took cautious steps forward. Written across the front in scrawled handwriting was a chilling message. "Walk away if you want to live." Rachel swallowed hard, her heartbeat a thunderous rhythm in her chest. This wasn't just a warning, it was a direct threat. Vaughn and Mitchell weren't just watching her, they were inside her home. She took a slow step back, her instincts screaming at her to leave. She knew she couldn't stay here any longer. If she hesitated, she'd end up just like the others who had tried to go against them, disappeared, disgraced, or dead. She turned on her heel and strode out of the apartment, never looking back. She needed to move fast. Naomi's trial was closing in, and if she didn't act now, there might not be another chance. Pulling out her phone, she dialed Lucas Bennett. "We need to meet. Now," Rachel said urgently, glancing around the empty street, her paranoia growing. "I think they know." Lucas was silent for a few seconds. Then his voice came through, tense and serious. "I just got something too. Meet me at Ember Cafe. Right now." Rachel exhaled sharply, gripping the phone tightly. She had officially crossed the line of no return. But if there was even a chance of bringing down Vaughn, Mitchell, and Hayes, she was willing to risk everything. Tonight, they would make their move, and this time, they wouldn't stop until the truth came to light. Lucas Bennett sat in Ember Cafe, his fingers tapping lightly against the table as his mind raced through a whirlwind of theories. The manila envelope containing the damning photo of Vaughn and Judge Hayes sat inside his briefcase, but he knew it wasn't enough. He needed something undeniable, something that couldn't be dismissed, manipulated, or buried. A witness, a confession, a piece of evidence so irrefutable that it would shatter the case against Naomi Carter once and for all. The door swung open, and Rachel Torres stepped inside. Her face was tense, her posture rigid with the weight of what she carried. She sat across from Lucas, pulled out a small USB drive, and slid it across the table. "I found something," she said, her voice firm. "But we need someone to confirm it." Lucas plugged the drive into his laptop, his eyes widening as he scanned the files. It contained internal police records detailing years of falsified arrests carried out by Vaughn and Mitchell. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of innocent people, most people of color, had been targeted, their case files doctored to justify wrongful imprisonment. This wasn't just about Naomi. This was a system of corruption operating in plain sight. A deep, gravelly voice interrupted their thoughts. "I can help you." Lucas and Rachel turned sharply. A tall, older man with graying hair and piercing eyes stood near their table, holding a cup of coffee. He pulled out a chair and placed a thick manila folder on the table. "My name is Henry Calloway. I was a high-ranking officer in the Stonebridge Police Department," he said. "I saw what Vaughn and Mitchell were doing for years, but back then, I was too much of a coward to stop them." Lucas studied him carefully. "Why now?" Calloway sighed, his fingers tightening around his coffee cup. "Because I can't live with my silence anymore. And because Naomi Carter doesn't deserve to be destroyed like this." He opened the folder, revealing stacks of original case files. "These are the real reports, the ones Vaugh and Mitchell covered up. They fabricated evidence, paid off witnesses, and manipulated the courts. Judge Hayes was in on it too. Lucas picked up the papers, feeling the weight of history pressing into his hands. This was it. This was what they needed. Rachel exhaled, a rare smile breaking through her tension. Then it's time. Time to turn the tide. The next day, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the new evidence, and now the public's faith in Naomi's guilt had begun to waver. The air was thick with anticipation as Naomi entered, her expression unreadable but her eyes burning with determination. Lucas stood, gripping a thick file of documents. Your Honor, I am presenting newly obtained evidence that proves this case is a calculated setup. Judge Hayes scowled, his grip tightening on the gavel. Mr. Bennett, if this is another attempt to delay proceedings, I will reject it immediately. Lucas met the judge's glare head-on. I have a witness. A former high-ranking officer of the Stonebridge Police Department, one who has first-hand knowledge of the corruption behind this case. The courtroom erupted in whispers as Henry Calloway stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. He took the stand, raised his right hand, and swore an oath. Then, with a steady voice, he told the jury everything. I served over 30 years in law enforcement, he began, and I've seen corruption rot this system from the inside. But Vaugh and Mitchell, they took it to another level. They planted evidence, framed innocent people, and funneled bribe money to those who would look the other way, including Judge Leonard Hayes. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Harper, the prosecutor, shot to his feet. Objection. These are baseless allegations. Lucas flipped open the case file. Then let's look at the facts. He walked toward the jury, placing documents in front of them. These are original case files from the police archives, evidence that Vaugh and Mitchell systematically fabricated reports, altered timestamps, and falsified arrest records. He turned and held up another photograph, the one of Vaugh, Mitchell, and Hayes in the bar. And this is proof that the judge presiding over this trial has been meeting privately with the very officers responsible for this case. Judge Hayes slammed his gavel, his face pale with anger. I will not tolerate this disrespect in my courtroom. Lucas took a step forward. What are you afraid of, Your Honor? Vaugh and Mitchell, sitting in the back of the room, exchanged uneasy glances. Vaugh whispered, we need to get out of here now, but it was already too late. After an hour of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom. The silence was suffocating as the foreman handed the verdict to the judge. The tension crackled in the air as Judge Hayes read the verdict aloud. We, the jury, find the defendant, Naomi Carter, not guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered. Others stared in shock, struggling to reconcile the truth they had ignored for so long. Naomi's shoulders sagged as the weight of the nightmare lifted off her chest. She turned to Lucas and Rachel, gratitude shining in her eyes. But the fight wasn't over yet. Two plainclothed officers entered the courtroom and strode toward Vaugh and Mitchell. One of them pulled out a warrant. Detective Richard Vaugh, Sergeant Evan Mitchell, you are under arrest for corruption, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. Vaugh bolted up, his face twisting in fury. This is before he could finish. Cuffs were snapped around his wrists. Mitchell struggled, but the officers held him firm. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment the men who had orchestrated Naomi's downfall were finally being brought to justice. Judge Hayes barely had time to react before a representative from the Department of Justice placed an envelope on his desk. Judge Leonard Hayes, you are hereby suspended pending investigation into allegations of bribery and judicial misconduct. His face turned ghostly white. He opened his mouth to object, but the evidence against him was undeniable. His career was over. Naomi watched as they were all led away. The very system that had once crushed her now crumbling under the weight of its own corruption. Rachel turned to her, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. You did it. Naomi shook her head. No, we did. The sound of applause filled the courtroom. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, justice had prevailed. And though the road ahead was still long, Naomi Carter knew one thing for certain. She had survived, and she wasn't done fighting yet. The story of Naomi Carter is not just about one woman fighting against corruption. It's about resilience, truth, and the power of standing up for what is right. In our world today, injustice still exists in many forms. Corrupt systems, unfair accusations, and abuses of power happen more often than we realize. But Naomi's story reminds us of an important lesson. Truth always finds a way to prevail, but only if we have the courage to fight for it. If there's one thing to take away from this, it's that we must always question what we are told, especially when the stakes are high. Blindly believing everything we see in the media or hear from those in power can lead to devastating consequences. Seek the truth, stand up for those who can't defend themselves, and never let fear silence you. Rachel Torres's bravery is another powerful reminder that even in a corrupt system, there are still good people willing to do the right thing. If you ever find yourself in a position where you witness injustice, remember that even small actions can make a big difference. Whether it's speaking up, gathering evidence, or simply supporting those who are fighting against oppression, your voice matters. Most importantly, never underestimate the strength of perseverance. Naomi could have given up at any point, but she chose to keep fighting. And because of that, she not only cleared her name, but also brought down an entire corrupt system. The road to justice is never easy, but it is always worth walking. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Your support means everything to us. We put our heart and soul into telling these powerful stories because we believe that they need to be heard. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with others. Let's spread the message that justice matters and that truth will always rise above lies. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another powerful story like this. Together, we can shine a light on the issues that truly matter and create a community that stands for justice, truth, and change. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have so many more incredible stories to share with you, and we can't wait to have you along for the journey. Thank you again for being here. Stay strong, stay aware, and keep fighting for what's right. We'll see you in the next one.